Not every viral health hack is worth your time.
From butter coffee to raw liver, let's separate science from showmanship.
Just because it's trending doesn't mean that it's helping.
So trendy right now. Hello, my name is Dr. Scott Sherr, and welcome back to another episode of Don't Look Up, where we ask you to look up. Real science for you. We love talking about things that might be slightly controversial, slightly fun, and always interesting.
So today, Scott, we're going to get into health hacks that may not work. This is one of my pet peeves about this industry.
Me too.
Actually.
Me too. You and I share this.
Probably my largest pet peeve about this industry is that you have a lot of things that become trendy. Ice baths, carnivore diets, dopamine fasting, even things like injecting salmon sperm in your face.
I don't know anybody that's done that recently.
Yeah, not at all. Maybe we should flash some pictures. Anyway, but the cases are oftentimes these are hacks that may seem sexy on the surface. They may seem like the key to enlightenment even, but ultimately, do they work? And that's what we're going to explore today.
Yeah, I'm excited because this is a topic that you and I get asked about a ton. And the question always becomes, how can you help people navigate all of the information that's coming out there from all the influencers, from all the practitioners? And how do you say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm not going to do? And maybe the relationship you have with, the information that's coming to you, because it's so hard to process so much.
So today I want to frame this conversation in just a certain way. First, I want to tackle a couple of health trends and the potential problems with them.
Sure.
Then we want to go into a little bit of a framework that we teach in health optimization medicine and practice, and how that can actually serve as a filter, and really get into the not so sexy sides of health, the actual value side of health, which is consistency.
Indeed.
So let's go into some of those.
The health hacks first?
Yeah, let's go into those health hacks that may or may not work.
I think you already made a couple of points. I'll start with ice baths, for example.
Ooh, ice baths.
Yes. So like anything in America, if you can do a little bit of it, you might as well do a ton of it and then commoditize everything. And
what's your longest ice bath time?
I think has gone maybe 5 minutes. I mean, the thing about it is that bigger is better in America. The problem is that the type of cold that you're getting, the exposure, the colder you go, the longer you go, the more stress hormones that you're going to release. And so if you're diving or going into the water at 32 degrees Fahrenheit every day of the week, you are going to stress your body out, man. And I've seen this a lot where, especially at these really low temperatures. Now, if you're doing like 55 degrees, 60 degrees, like this is pretty well tolerated for most people. But if you're doing like 32 degrees, you're chopping out ice every day, that is a huge amount of stress because the body goes into this fight or flight mode as soon as you get into the water. And you release a ton of dopamine, a ton of norepinephrine and epinephrine. And so you feel on. And the cool thing about water on the other side of it is that once that stress response goes away, you have this vagal reflex, which is the calming down reflex. So then after that initial get me the hell out of the water feeling, you get that going. But the problem is even over time, that sympathetic storm that you added in the first place starts really deteriorating your neurohormones, your neurosteroids, and you start depleting the system overall.
I just want to add a comment here, is that you see the ice bath particularly popular among type A hard driving people.
Right.
And this is almost the exact case where you might not want to do ice baths every day at 32 degrees because, as you said, you're stimulating a sympathetic nervous system.
Yep.
These people already probably have issues with cortisol and other issues in their sympathetic nervous system, and they're just overloading. And I like to think of stress as a bucket.
Yeah.
And, stress can come from your environment. It can come from your work. It can come from your partner. It can come from the food you eat.
Of course.
But you're now adding on top of it this ice bath. If your bucket's already full and you're causing it to spill over with something that you think is helping you, it seems kind of illogical to add that to your repertoire, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that can work in the short term for people, especially if they're type A. Like, oh, this is so much better than coffee because I can go for hours after this. But as you said, the problem is that nobody knows how to calm down anymore. Nobody knows how to turn all the brakes of their system, which is the GABA system, right? And so we know that if you're just going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, it's just constantly fight or flight in various ways. And the ice bath is a great example of something that really turns on that stress mode. And that if you don't have another period of time when you're calming down during the day, you're going to burn out at some point. And I've seen this. People that do a cold tub or a cryo multiple days of the week, like they can do it for even 6 months or a year in some cases, but you can get away with it for a while. But when you see it from a neurochemistry perspective, you can see them significantly depleting amino acids, the precursors to make some of these stress hormones like norepinephrine, dopamine, and catecholamines in general. And so I don't think it's a sign of being awesome by going into a cold plunge every day. Now, if you go milder temperatures, it's probably better, but we're not a moderate kind of country. Is what it comes down to.
One thing I want to add to this is that, people that are looking to build muscle and they go for their workout, they do all of their weightlifting, and then they go into the ice bath right afterwards. That's a great way to just blunt your muscle protein synthesis period. But also, one thing that a friend of mine, James Hewitt, likes to highlight is that the studies done on ice baths on neurotransmitters are actually urinary neurotransmitters.
Yes.
And so there are issues with measuring urinary neurotransmitters because you're not actually measuring the neurotransmitters in the brain.
Right. You're just measuring a sign of something that may be from the brain, but it could also be from other places. Like, for example, measuring the metabolites of serotonin, great example, because most of the serotonin we make is not made in the brain, it's made in the gut. And so if you have elevated levels of metabolites from serotonin, it may be from the brain, it may not be. So it's very difficult to know exactly what's going on from looking at urinary neurotransmitters. And this is something that we do in clinical practice as a contextual milieu or ecosystem of various things that we're looking at from a metabolite perspective.
And you have to look also at the clinical correlations,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
So I do believe people when they say they get more focused from an ice bath. I understand that, but the studies are on your neurotransmitters for the most part.
Right. So what I always say is moderation is better, less cold for the most part, and less often. And so there's arguments, I get that. In short periods of time, maybe going colder for longer would be better. I do think that if you're an endurance athlete and you're doing long races, going into cold afterwards can be great because you're just trying to mitigate the oxidative stress, the stress of being in an endurance race. So there are reasons, but like everything else, I remember like with the ketogenic diet, for example, like I remember it was really great. We were talking about metabolic therapies and ketogenic diets. And then all of a sudden there's keto pizza, there's keto ice cream, there's, keto cereal and everything else. It's like, come on, guys. I mean, this is really not like artificial food flavorings.
But that's just the food industry, and they're just trying to take advantage of that, right?
But that's commoditizing. Like I know everybody has a cold plunge company, right?
Yeah.
Or buying cold plunges from China and putting their names on it. It's like it's the same, kind of deal with what America does.
Okay, so we did cold plunge.
Yeah.
Let's go into another one, another favorite of mine, the carnivore diet.
Yeah, have you ever done the carnivore diet?
Briefly, actually. So, and this was the best place to do it. I was in Argentina for 3 weeks.
I could do it.
Now, I will tell you that, like every experiment that I do, I try to have before and after measurements. My lipid numbers, not so great afterwards. And I'm not saying this isn't a bad idea for everybody.
Sure.
But for me in particular, not so great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about ways that the carnivore diet has been effective, right? And so you have certain reports of people with autoimmune conditions, for example, where they can't really eat any food and they go on carnivore diets. You see these case reports of people experiencing relief.
Yeah.
But that by and large is not the reason why everybody should go on a carnivore diet, right?
Yeah, I've spoken to a number of people about this over the years, colleagues and scientists, and there are actually really no great studies on the carnivore diet and its impact on overall health. Now, you have people that have been on this long term that will tell you how amazing it is and everything else. But I think the key I always kind of go back to is that any extremely restrictive diet is going to produce usually a positive effect. So if you go full vegan, if you were eating a standard American diet before that, you're going to feel so much better for a period of time. And the carnivore diet is very similar to that in the sense you're restricting your diet significantly, especially of fiber. And so the much less fiber, if you have a gut that has overgrown bacteria, if you have dysbiosis, if you have other kinds of things going on, a leaky gut, and you take out all the fiber for a little while, that's going to be helpful because your system is not going to be overloaded with fiber, and fiber causes more bacteria to grow. So my feeling with the carnivore diet is that I do believe that eating more ancestral Paleolithic is likely a good idea. But we do also know that Paleolithic people would eat lots of fiber and they would chew on things forever, like with tubers and like hard pieces of plants and things like that. So it's not like they just ate meat. They would eat a lot of meat if it came in from somebody killed an animal, the community would eat it, and they would eat nose to tail. So I think that is a good idea too. But it wasn't just that. And even the most hardcore carnivores out there many of them have changed their tune over the years. Right now they have a little bit of fruits, a little bit of honey, rice even.
Yeah, I've heard rice come back into some of their.
Yeah, so you start off a restricted diet. It gives you a big following because people get sort of militantly or just obsessively about something. And then classic is that this vegan influencer gets caught eating fish or something like that. And they're like, I couldn't not do it anymore because I felt so bad and I needed to have fish and I didn't want to tell anybody. And then they lose their all following and, the whole kind of the culture that we have around it. Mm-hmm. I think carnivore is similar as well. Any restrictive, even vegans are like so militantly vegan sometimes, but that's not really helping people, I think, over the long term because there's so much more nuance. And the idea really is to personalize this to what works best for you. And having the least restrictive diet is typically best.
Mm-hmm. Let's get into frameworks that people can kind of use to potentially personalize health for them. And one of the things I like about what we teach in health optimization medicine practice is that each client is an individual and you look at the individual in terms of what they need. So let's take people through your client process actually and how that allows somebody to identify maybe the tools, technologies, whether or not they need the red light catheter, for example, which doesn't exist.
Yes,
but just an example. Yeah. So what are some frameworks that we can, testing protocols that people can go through?
Well, I think that I'm interested in your perspective here too, Boomer, because you and I came into this in a very similar frame, right? Where we were looking for that kind of a foundational way of thinking about it. And Dr. Ted, our founder and pioneer of the nonprofit, as well as Transcriptions, he created this framework called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, or HOMO for short. And what he kind of told me back in 2017-18 timeframe was there needs to be a framework for all this biohacking. This is what it could be. If you have a framework, then you can use these biohacks as a additional lever to push or to pull and see significant benefit. But if you don't have a framework where everything's standing on, like the bottom of your pyramid, then everything is going to be just following the next squirrel that you hear about on the radio or who listens to the radio, any influencers on Instagram or whatever else on YouTube. And so what health optimization medicine really does as a framework, it helps build that base foundation for you. So you know how well your cells are working in real time. And so if you're starting to use like the cool supplements and like the cool technologies, but your mitochondria suck, there's not a lot you're going to be able to do to help the mitochondria work better if you don't work on that foundational principle first. So optimizing vitamins, minerals, nutrients, cofactors, antioxidant status, heavy metals, understanding how this is all working at the cellular level, that became the foundation of my practice. And so I was involved in hyperbaric medicine for many years, and I still am. But I realized that if I put people in the chamber too soon, if they were sick, they wouldn't do well. Or if they did do well, they only did well temporarily. And then they stopped and they got worse again. And so a big component for me was understanding that they needed this foundation. And then, could we use the carnivore diet? Or you use even a vegan diet, which I hardly ever do, but could you use a restrictive diet like a FODMAP diet or autoimmune paleo or something like that, which is kind of usually where I go to, tell people rebound from 40, 50, 60 years of being in a place or getting to a place where they are now. And of course, they want to feel better tomorrow, but it's going to take time. And we have some solutions for the now part too at Transcriptions. But the idea of long-term health requires time and it requires a real kind of an intentional foundational framework. And I know you came from the genetic side, looking at this same kind of problem, right?
So for me, I always, when I explain this to people, I always think about, how do we create a filter for you on this health world? Because similar to everything like news or I come from a finance background. And so from finance side, like you have a deluge of information. Same thing is with health, but how do you create a filter on that? And for me, a lot of that, Peter Drucker gets credit with this phrase, but ultimately it came from Lord Byron, and it's measure what matters, right? And what gets measured gets managed. And so I like to start people, myself included, on lab tests, because how do you actually know what is going to work for you and what's not? And this also leaves you in a place where you're not susceptible to influence and people that are clever speakers, for example. And so you can get a series of tests. We like to use metabolomics tests here. Yeah. And so the metabolomics test that Scott alluded to earlier measure your cells in what they need now and what they've needed recently. And so it can look at vitamins, nutrients, and cofactors and allows you to then say, in this health world, what is applicable to me? That framework also can be applied to technologies, right? So if you measure your metabolomics learn that your mitochondria have a significant amount of dysfunction, then some of these conversations around methylene blue, red light therapy, etc., make sense for you, rather than just saying. And look, guys, I've been there. Certainly, I am number one experimenter. I love experimenting, trying new things, buying new technologies. I've spent thousands of dollars on my own health, but having that framework allows you to decide which one of those technologies is actually worth spending money on. Because otherwise you're going to end up buying like six different red lights because each one is just nuanced,
slightly different.
And you might also end up buying all of these supplements. A perfect example here is nootropics, right?
Yeah.
And so nootropics we like to think of them as sort of enhancing the brain for either performance or health optimization. But your brain's your cells are only gonna perform to the limits that they're allowed, right? Yeah. And so if you have a foundational issue in your cells, let's say you're missing something like magnesium or vitamin C, those nootropics, which do cost quite a bit of money, might only work just slightly. Yeah. So if you're at a 60 and let's say the nootropic takes you to 65, yeah, sure, you're going to feel good. But wouldn't you rather be at 100 and then go to 120? And the only way to really know that is to know what those cells are missing.
Yeah, the foundational biology is so key. And we always talk about, to optimize brain health, you need to optimize cellular health, right? And Dr. has a great graphic that he did a long time ago on nootropics specifically on all these various levels. But the base level is the cellular level, the ability of your cells to function well, to make energy, to detox in the energy, to process food and nutrients, to actually kill off themselves if they need to be killed off, because cells need to do this over time. We're recycling mitochondria every single day. And so we have to know that the basic cell is been lost in medicine. It's been lost in clinical practice. And bringing it back to that cellular level, metabolomics is the best way to do it right now, because you can actually measure what's happening in real time, as Boomer said, and you get the sense of not only what's happening inside the body from genomics and proteomics and transcriptomics, all the levels that you have after the genes and transcription of the genes, but also what's happening in the environment, also what's happening outside of you that's coming in. So the toxins that you're subject to, the water, the light, the environment around you, and also the microbiota that are in your system and outnumber you vastly. And then this is what we call, the holobiont, right? The HOLO biont, holobiont hacker here, right? So the shirt really is a reference to the idea that if you really want to be a biohacker, you really should be a holobiont hacker first. And then you can do the biohacking on top of that and get all those fancy tools and technologies. And actually, as you were talking, I remember going to a biohacking conference in 2016. And I just saw people buy so much shit, so many things, like the new Vasper, the new sauna, the new cold plunge, the new cryo. It was like people $30,000, $50,000. I mean, a lot of money on these things. And I was like, guys, like maybe you don't need to start off with all of those things. Maybe focus on some foundational things. Even in the regenerative world, we have people getting stem cells and exosomes and PRP. Like these are all great, but if you don't have working mitochondria, the stem cells aren't going to work very well. They're not going to work very well, I promise. And so but I always think we just always like the fancy new thing. And I'm not against stem cells and regenerative technologies, but I even, one of my colleagues, we were talking about the use of methylene blue before regenerative procedures. And he's seeing fantastic benefits here because why? He's giving more mitochondrial support so that when the stem cells go in, even cool new stem cells that he's doing, they work better because mitochondria are working better. And so we have to remember that the foundation is not that difficult, but we don't want to forget it, because if we do, then everything else becomes less effective.
Yeah, and of course, testing costs money, right? We know that, but ultimately, I can tell from my own experience. Yeah. I can tell from my own experience, the amount of money saved, because you're able to focus your intentions, is so much greater than the amount of money spent on these tests.
Yeah.
Let's go into some of those foundation things, because there are basic behaviors that people should master really before really tackling some of these more advanced technologies.
So what's your favorite one?
Sleep, of course. And it's also the thing that I have to work the most on, right? And so anything that can get me to sleep 7 or 8 hours a night is worth it in terms of an investment for me.
Yeah, you have the bed, right?
Oh, I have just such a great sleep rig. But anyway, like anything that I can do to master that 7 to 8 hours of sleep is great. That includes things like bedtime routines.
Yes.
These are things routines are not sexy. I guess morning routines became sexy a little bit ago because of Tim Ferriss and other people, but routines are not sexy. But our system, and one of the modules that we have in health optimization medicine practice is chronobiology.
Yep.
Right. And chronobiology to me is mastering your biological rhythms. Sleep is a great anchor. And actually, Dr. Ted has a sleep anchoring technique, which involves really the start of your day is when you go to bed.
Right.
And so prioritizing sleep for me is one of those foundations that you have to master. What about you?
Sexy sleep routines, I'm all over those. I think that the idea is that what I always tell my patients is that if you have it doesn't have to be sexy, but just any kind of sleep routine, it can involve sex, I guess, if you want, but really it's a sleep routine where you go to bed every single night at the same time. And within about 5 to 10 minutes of you going to sleep, hopefully a bit longer than that, you have the exact same thing you do every single night. And that's been transformative for me because as soon as I hit the pillow after doing that routine, my body knows it's lights out, right? So I think sleep's a big one. Another one that we know very well, the Dr. Ted has a whole saying here, which we can kind of go through, but the next one would be moving well. So the idea is that our bodies were not supposed to be in one place for long periods of time.
You mean like these chairs, right?
Like these chairs, exactly. Because sitting is, as we all know, the new smoking, right? Thankfully, not many people smoke anymore, which is good, at least not cigarettes around here in Boulder. It's other things. And that's good, but the problem is that we're not moving very much throughout the day. So moving every hour, we talked to our internal team about this just a little while ago. At Transcriptions, I do a health teach-in for our company every month. This month was moving, and it wasn't exercise. I'm just talking about getting up out of your chair and doing something. Is it a walk around the block? Is it up your stairs a couple times? Is it a couple push-ups? Just something to move your body, or even just moving your calf muscles, your soleus muscles specifically. Just doing that throughout the day is going to increase your metabolic rate by like 20%. So moving well is a big one as well.
All right, sunning well. This kind of goes a little bit back to the sleep thing, because if you look at how our bodies synchronize their rhythms, right? And I always come back to chronobiology. It's my favorite module within health optimization medicine and practice. But one of the ways that we can sync our biological rhythms, light and food, right? Mm-hmm. And so this also gets into time-restricted feeding as a benefit as well. But light, trying to get sun first thing in the morning to help sync those biological rhythms, definitely a priority for me. In the winter, this is a way that I've used this filter to buy technologies, right?
Yeah,
and so
that's great, yeah.
if I want to sync my biological rhythms in the winter, I live in Chicago, which can get really cold, not always dark, but cold. If I don't want to go outside because it's too cold, I'll get a daylight lamp, for example. And there's a couple of companies out there that make really good ones. There's also vitamin D lamps. Yep. Spurti is the one that's been around forever. I know there's new technologies
now. There's new ones too, yeah.
So there are ways that you can use light to sync those biological rhythms.
Yeah.
Also, the flip side of this, and this gets into the era that we live in now as a society, is managing light late at night. So at night, we have Philips Hue lights in our house. Mm-hmm. And so you can see that the lux actually starts to dim over the course of the day. You can flip it to red. I know some people that do that. I used to live in Amsterdam, so that red light was a different signal.
Yeah, different signal for your house. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, but you can also manage light in your bedroom, right? Yeah. So we don't allow TV in the bedroom. We don't keep phones in the bedroom. We don't keep phones next to us. And so I'm not staring at a screen late at night. And that allows me to not really dampen things like melatonin production.
Yeah, that's a big one. And I always say to my patients that your bed is for two things: sleep and sex. That's it. You shouldn't be reading in bed. You shouldn't be...
I thought the kitchen was for sex.
Well, the kitchen can always be for sex. I mean, that's multi-fact. You can do multiple things in the kitchen. But your bed, you don't really cook food in, right? So hopefully, that's kind of weird. But another one that we talk about is, we talked about moving well, sleeping well, sunning well. The other one is eating well. And I know that's a harder one for people overall, because there's so many different... I was just listening to another podcast about this, like so many different methods and like ideas.
Yeah, and this is a health hacks podcast, or the health hacks episode, and we were talking about trends, and diets are so trendy all the time.
Yeah.
If we just came up with a diet, we'd be so much more popular.
I know. But I always tell people, I've done this for a long time. It's like, look, don't eat processed food. Don't eat refined sugar very much if you can. And just eat like your grandparents would have before there was all this other stuff. And you're probably going to be okay. Like, yes, gluten and dairy and blah, blah. Like there's a lot of sort of nuances with all this. But in general, just eat clean. Just don't eat shit. Like processed foods, just avoid, and refined sugar. If you just do those two things, like if you're on the standard American diet, you don't have those things, you're going to feel 50% better if you're having them already. So small things can go a long way, but personalizing this, depending on the person using testing, is usually the way I go. So that's eating well. And there's also grounding well, right? We talk about that too. Grounding is getting your feet on the ground outside. There's a very nice, and lots of studies showing this is actually very relaxing for your nervous system. It helps being like a sink for electrons going down into the ground of the earth. And you actually will feel more relaxed and more grounded, and you'll feel that way if you actually just kind of intuitively feel it too.
And I just want to add to that, spending time in nature.
Yeah.
Look, there's in Japan, they actually prescribe nature time. I think in Scotland too.
Yeah.
And they have a really cool Japanese term for it. But the fact is that your cortisol levels actually decrease when you spend time in nature. So I'd add that to the grounding well.
For sure. And I think that's because this is our natural state, is to be more within nature. And most of us are just not.
I live in a city.
Yeah. And we're living in synthetic worlds, right? And that's why sometimes we need synthetic things to help us along the way. From a mitochondrial function, we talk about methylene blue, for example, right? But in essence, we should be trying to get back into nature, and when we can.
And for everybody listening to this, as we're ticking through these, it might be, look, I live in a city, and it might be harder to ground well, but this is actually a moment where you can say, okay, now I need a technology, a synthetic, in order to help me do that. And there's other things out there that can help you.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think the other one we talk about is loving well. And this is really what Dr. Ted means by here is like having good relationships that build you up and don't break you down. And unfortunately, many of us are on that latter category where we're in relationships where they're stressful, they're breaking you down and not serving you. So releasing as many of those relationships as you can, but also on the other side of it, trying to build up and grow the relationships that feed you, that nourish you.
Beautiful. I think a couple of key takeaways from this is that having some sort of element of measurement in your health regime is certainly helpful. It provides that filter on the world so that you can know which one of these influencers are recommending something that's right for you versus recommending something that they get paid an affiliate commission on. And you can then have that filter, allow it to distill those technologies, those supplements, those things that you actually need. And ultimately, the money invested in measurement will pay dividends in terms of what you save on the technologies and supplement side.
Yeah, your foundation is key. If you don't have a solid foundation, as all of you know, from a building or a pyramid or whatever, everything else is not going to do very well on top of that. And so just chasing the new biohack is likely not going to serve you if you don't have a foundation. So you should have a foundational level of tools, technologies, practices that are building on that foundation itself. And then from there, you can build further. But don't get ahead of yourself. Take your time. Do one thing at a time. That's the other big thing that I want to mention here is that if you stack 20 things at the same time, you're not going to know what's working. And if you can be more methodical about it, it's going to serve you in the long run. So yeah, this is.
I want to actually touch on one more thing.
Yeah.
The idea of being a biont hacker. So the holobiont was a concept introduced by Lynn Margulis in the early 90s. It's the idea that you are a collection of organisms. And the way to optimize your health is actually to balance those organisms. And so when you start looking at your body as a collection of organisms, you're looking at your gut microbes, you're looking at the viruses within your body, and we all have them. Mm-hmm. You're looking at your fungus, and you're saying, okay, are these in the right balance? And so having that perspective of a biont hacker, of a holobiont hacker, is an approach to health that, again, allows you to put that filter on the world and it allows you to determine what is right for you.
Well said.
Okay, and should we wrap this up?
Yeah, so thank you everybody for listening to another episode of Don't Look Up, where we ask you to look up. If you like this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. We read all the comments below. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And we'll have more science, cutting edge, and interesting things to say in further episodes.
Thank you, Scott.